Hello and welcome to Hidden Existence, and it's Anything Goes with me and Jason from, well,
a lot of places, really.
a lot of places, just all over the place.
I'm well traveled, let's say it that way.
Well
Digitally,
traveled.
at least, because I'm just stuck here in my office, which is a
Yeah,
closet.
me too. Hello and welcome to Hidden Existence, and it's anything. What did I just do before I started this? Tried to turn all that off.
Hey, you said anything goes, so
Anything goes. Anything
there you
goes. If you like Bible studies, go and check out Jason's channel, which is not another Bible study, but it's a Bible study. The link's in the description already, so if people want to go and check him out, go over and have a look. So tonight, anything goes, and you picked one of my favorite subjects again. This.
go.
And I love this subject. What did you want to add about it?
Okay, the Cynocephalus are and sometimes it's called the Cynophali, show up all over antiquity. That is actually from the Nuremberg Chronicles.
Okay.
Essentially, all across history, we have these reports of dog-headed people. Essentially, bodies of normal humans, but dog heads, and they bark. So the question sort of becomes that's popped up lately is, were these the dogmen that we're seeing today? Are they one and the same? Is there a connection between these dog-headed people and, like, say, Anubis? Were these dog-headed people even real? Is it maybe something else? Like, is it that we were taking the word dog-headed people a little too literally, and that's where the drawings are coming from, and maybe it was actually a little bit of racism? Well, what are we doing here, right? And what I found really interesting is that there was a letter written in the 9th century by a Carolingian monk, and then it was to basically his main abbot, right, saying, "Hey, what do I do here with I'm seeing these dog-headed creatures, and I don't know if I need to go try and communicate with them and spread the gospel to them. Do I need to leave them alone? What's up?" So he sends them this letter. What we actually have in the records is their response. It's a theologian by the name of again, I'm going to kill this word or this name. It's Raminus. Raminus is the theologian who responds. Right? I mean, we have the whole letter, whole 9 yards, and it is a wild letter because he's like, okay, so dogs, beasts of the field, they kind of do this way, and they kind of compare and contrast these Cynocephali with other beasts and then with humans, and basically comes up with, these things may have a soul because they're clearly communicating. But what's interesting is they weren't just wearing skins, which had been reported by Herodotus, right? He wrote of these things in Libya. But they said that they just wore the skins of animals. But in this letter, they point out that they actually wore clothing made of cloth. So they were actually these people were making fabrics. So he's like, look, they're farming, they make fabrics, they're clearly communicating with one another intelligently. These things have a soul. That was sort of the summation of the argument. But he clearly says humans have these very roundish heads, but these creatures have these very elongated, oblong faces. So we're sort of left at this question of, was there an actual race of people that had these very sort of elongated faces? Maybe they didn't actually look like dogs. Like, maybe that's sort of, that sort of artwork is more of them taking it literally. And what they mean is they don't look human. They have this very strange, protruded kind of a face. So maybe they aren't actually dog people, kind of a thing. That's a question, but we don't know. I mean, this is sort of the problem with this whole question, right? Is, well, we don't know if these were just, if they were just seeing maybe a human population that had some sort of weird mutation that became sort of commonplace, right? Maybe a sort of a very wild or pronounced prognathism, but these things occur and are seen by numerous historians and travelers across the centuries. So we kind of need to say, hey, maybe these things were real at one point.
Yeah. So are you thinking these are connected to Dogman as we know it now?
My thought is no, and here's why. So again, this is one of those things where a lot of people who are looking into Dogman today, they look back and see these creatures that were exist. Therefore, they must have something connected to the Dogman, and they'll point back to Anubis as well. But my thought is, every commentary on the Cinephaly, regardless of whether it's Herodotus or some of the other historians or this 9th century Carolinian monk, or even in the 1490s, there was a knight who claimed to have run across him on this island in the Arabian Sea. They were tool users. They were farming. They wore clothes made of fabrics that they made themselves. So they were textile manufacturers. This seems far more human than what we see with the modern dogmen phenomena, right? Beyond that, we have some dogmen that have human-like legs, but they're still covered in hair. Others have sort of that digitrade, backwards-facing leg kind of a thing. Again, still covered in hair. But these beings, whatever they were, the Cinephaly, their body was not covered in hair, right? They had a basically normal human body, but just their heads looked weird. So I do think this also separates them from Anubis, because the Egyptian gods, their pantheon, it's not just Anubis, right? You have all these other deities, and some of them have the heads of cats, some have the heads of crocodiles. So the question, so that puts them sort of out of that running. Like they can't really have a connection there. There's something else. But as far as the Cinephaly, whatever they were, because they don't seem to be around anymore, I don't think they're connected to the Dogmen, at least not directly, because the Dogmen they're just significantly different, right? These don't seem to be tool using, farming, they seem to be something else entirely.
Yeah, I don't know what to add to it other than it being just a descriptive thing, making it seem unhuman, but it's not, because you're taking it to another level when they're using tools, they're wearing clothes. Did people breed them? I don't know, or
exactly. No.
them and clothe them.
Right. I mean, it's definitely not. I mean, these don't seem to be connected to the Dogman phenomena that we're seeing today. But there are, again, there are depictions of Saint Christopher, right, the Catholic saint, with a dog head, and there are these other accounts, and there are some that we've seen where people were they were mistranslating things like the Latin word for Canaanite actually turns into, when they translate it into canine. And so you have people that we knew were just normal people drawn with dog heads. So it's entirely, because there is a later book, it's a night, like I said, from the 1400s, 1490s really, that depicts the dog-headed men looking very differently. They look like men, just but with very prognathic faces and very wide faces. So it's entirely possible that these Cinephaly aren't as advertised. They weren't dog-headed men, right? They were just men. They were maybe just people who were just maybe really prognathic, or maybe they'd even done some sort of body modification, right? And that changed their skulls so significantly that to someone coming in, they're like, "Whoa, I don't know what to do with this." Right? Are these people? Are these something else? It's one of those things where it's hard to remember the mindset of the people of that time, right? Some have even said that the Cinephaly weren't actually humans at all, but rather that there was some sort of a connection to, it was really Ethiopians, but that there was also some sort of a monkey that they were, that it basically all just got mixed up in translation, kind of a thing. Again, I don't know that I buy that one entirely. It's too many mistakes. I can see
Mhm.
one or two, but it's like it's a little too much too often. Um, but I think what we may be looking at with the Cinephaly isn't dogmen, but rather maybe some a population that had maybe either an extreme mutation. When you have a small isolated population like on an island, it's not unheard of to have a strange mutation sort of become dominant. Like we have the ostrich-footed people. That's literally what they're called, the ostrich-footed people of Africa. They have their at some point a large percentage of the population has their toes actually do like this, like they're all kind of grouped together. It's a weird um, kind of a thing that's occurred. It's a very large percentage of this one tribe that has it, right? So it's entirely possible that's what we're seeing here, right? That maybe it's body modification or just an isolated population. Something became dominant, and they just look very odd to someone who's traveling from Europe or the Middle East into
Mm,
some of these areas. But yeah,
that's interesting. Just funny there, you said dog and monkey. I was reading before. There's some folklore in England. Have you ever heard of a Shrug Monkey?
no,
A
you
Shrug
haven't.
Monkey is a creature that shares features of a dog and a monkey. They kind of think it's like an old kind of shaggy sheepdog with the face of a monkey, and it's supposed to shuffle on its hind legs, or whiz by. Um, quite a long time ago. This started 1954. I mean, not a
Really?
long time ago, but that was the first mention of it. So it's probably a bit
So
older than that. But people
uh,
have reported this thing. Um,
it has the face of a monkey, but like the body of a dog.
yeah.
That's weird. I'm running across a couple of other stories like that. Again, different sort of thing, but where it's like it's a jaguar, like here in Texas, where it's like a jaguar but with the face of a monkey, or some other weird combination of things, and you're like, what is going on here, right? Where you have these, unlike Bigfoot or some of these other creatures, where there's this sort of consistent visualization of them, right? You have every once in a while these really weird groups, and you see people like this thing looked like a monkey with the body of a shaggy dog, and or it's a puma with the face of a monkey and an owl, and you're like, I'm sorry, what were you smoking at the time? Can we? Because it's like I, I'm kind of open to a lot of things, but some of this is sounding a little weird. I may need a little bit more to go on, but it keeps happening, right? It's a little hard to be. It's hard to be open, but then it's also hard to be skeptical because it's like, why do we keep seeing these things, right?
Yeah. Now, someone's mentioned the Vanara, was it, from India?
Yeah.
Crystal Abyss.
Mhm.
What was that? Oh,
Uh,
a group of people living in the forest.
mhm.
Are they dog-headed at all?
I think so.
Oh,
I'm trying to
Vanara
remember.
be monkey. So they were
Ah,
kind of maybe monkey people.
yeah, and that's the other sort of thing, right? It's there was a baboon that had been captured. I mean, a long time ago, and brought. It was captured and brought up to a German castle. I want to say late 15, early 1600s, and a lot of people who saw it claimed that he had a werewolf, right? So it's entirely possible that there's, again, we have to understand the people's viewpoints of things 100, 200, 300, 400, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. It was very, very different. They had a very different view of the world. And a lot of what I found, like in the Bible, we have a lot of things where it's like they talk about unicorns and basilisks, and you're like, and we have this on our head of, oh, they mean a unicorn that you know craps rainbows and has it's a prancing, but that's not really what they meant, right? It was the word, but the problem is that word became associated with something else. over the years. It's like, yeah, it's a correct translation. The problem is how we view those creatures is very different.
I'm just going to put a picture up of this, and they've got, they're wearing something, aren't they?
Yeah.
And look there on the right. That's an interesting.
Yeah, he does look like a dog-headed man, doesn't he?
Yeah. So, sorry, have I put you off your?
No. I mean, that's great. And again, I was just watching Missing in Alaska. They've got it on YouTube now. The History Channel is putting up some of these older things like Monster Quest. So you can go back and watch them and that. And one of the things they talked about was the possibility of this weird ape, right? That supposedly lives, or that it is alleged to live in Alaska. And of course, everyone's like, there's no apes or great primates in Alaska. But some people are like, I saw this thing. And they describe it actually as, in fact, it's having an almost dog-like face, right? But they said about 3 feet tall. But they have a tail. In fact, the many of the Indian tribes around there that have them in their mythology, their name means the tailed ones. So it is entirely possible that there's a bunch of different things out there that we aren't, that we're just not privy to. We don't even know, right? And again, like the unicorn, you go back to like why the Hebrews chose that word, monoceros, which is Greek, for the translation of the Hebrew from Rahim into Greek. Why choose monoceros? It was their viewpoint of the world, right? They don't, like, for them, you have, they wouldn't have gone with, here's an Angus and here's this kind of a cow and here's this kind of, like the way we would. They would just say cattle. Well, for them, they were familiar with the rhinoceros. Well, but the Greeks really weren't, right? So Rahim for them meant an African rhinoceros, but the Greeks didn't have a word for that. But they looked and said, oh, here's a word. And if you look at the description of what the rhinoceros was, some people claim it's the Indian rhinoceros, right? In fact, that's even in their name is unicornis, their proper name. Others, though, think that the Indian rhinoceros isn't what's being referred to as the monoceros, because it does describe it as being maybe larger, having a single horn in the middle of its head, being covered in sort of a shaggy goat-like fur. So some people believe that the unicorn is actually an Elasmotherium, which was a giant woolly rhinoceros, basically.
Right.
So some people believe that's what it was, but for the rabbis living 200 years before Jesus shows up, they're looking around like, it looks like, they're basically the same creature, so they just use that same name. Because for them, they wouldn't have seen there as being a classification difference. They would say, well, that one's got 2 horns, that one's got 1 horn, who cares, right? It's the same creature. Again, an ox, we would be like, well, that's a water buffalo, and that's that, and they're like, it's all an ox, right? Just let's move on. Their language was very precise in some ways, and yet very generalized in others. So again, it begs the question: how many of these things that again are we seeing in bestiaries, and our imaginations are just different because of what they saw, or did they actually try to see something unique? Right? Did they see something maybe they don't exist anymore, but there was something that was like spectacularly unusual, and that's what they're working with, and they're trying to relay that to us, but they're not around anymore for us to see.
It's possible, isn't it? I mean, like you say, if it wasn't for finding bones of dinosaurs and things like that, how would we know they existed? And
Right.
Depending, I guess, where things die and when they die, there could be absolutely no evidence at all of some of these things. How much rock is there out there that we haven't gone through to find fossils and, bedrock, all sorts. So, yeah, it's absolutely possible.
Oh, particularly, and how many things didn't fossilize?
Yeah.
I mean, if these things were alive 1,000 years ago, right? But then they died, and they just in the forest. there's nothing left of them. They're just gone. Fossilization is a special process. It's not something that just happens all the time. Um, I forgot his name. I can see his face. Anyway, there was David Hatch's Childress made a great point. He points out that you had all of these bison that were killed by Buffalo Bill and his cohorts at the end of the 1800s, and yet not one of those skulls and one of the skeletons were ever fossilized. Millions of these creatures are just running around doing their thing, being killed, and yet if 2,000 years from now, no one would know that had occurred if no one had written it down, because there's not going to be any evidence. Everything is just turned to dust, right?
Yeah.
So unless there's an event to fossilize, we just would never have records of them.
Nobody knows. Hi, Brandon. Also, how many things could be hidden by governments? Not necessarily by governments either. How many things do museums have in storage that they haven't probably even looked at? Some places are like that, aren't they, where they have stacks and stacks of stuff, and maybe there's answers somewhere in a museum in the back room, gathering dust. Who knows?
Absolutely. Oh, they find things all the time, right? And that's the thing, is like they're like, hey, we found this new species of dinosaur. Well, it was dug up 100 years ago and just sat in a box, right? I mean, we have the fact that someone has to find it first, right? We also have the fact that someone then has to be honest about finding it. And I think that's, before we even get to, evil intent, shall we say, or deceptive intent, I think we just have to deal with the fact that bureaucracy and incompetence can often be far more devastating than evil intent ever could. I think it was Greg Gutfeld talked about. They were sort of talking about the whole Epstein thing. He's like, here's the problem. He absolutely could have killed himself, but because they're so incompetent, we would have no way of knowing if it's corruption or incompetence, because they look the same. And so it's easy to say that something is corrupt when it's just incompetent. But at the same time, I would ask the reverse. How many things are just corrupt, but we chalk it up to incompetence? It's just, oh, those guys in Washington are just idiots, or that city council, they're just stupid. Are they? Or do they know precisely what they're doing, and they're making certain that certain things occur? I think that's sort of the problem. And I think it's very easy it's easy to jump to conclusions on either, but we need to double check, and it's hard to tell. But absolutely. Your point, absolutely.
I wonder if, like in schools, we're given a curriculum, aren't we? And we have to stick to that. Whether it's what we need to learn is a different matter. And maybe it's like that with the media. Maybe it's like that with the museums. They put on shows of their stuff. You go around, there's displays of stuff. They decide what's coming out. They decide what isn't. Maybe there's, things will come to light when they're ready to show us. I don't know. Maybe, they've got stuff they don't even know what it is.
Oh, absolutely. I think let me take that. I completely agree with you on that. In fact, I think that's not just probable. I think that's absolutely the case. I think there's all kinds of things they have just like, we don't know what to do with it. So they put it away somewhere because they're like, look, I still want to keep my job.
It's relevance as well, isn't it? What relevance is showing something that you don't know? And it's a business, isn't it? A museum as well. They need to bring people in and try and educate us. But
oh yeah, well, it's prestige as well, right? I mean, you have people who've made their entire career out of a particular theory or perspective, and then if somebody shows up and is like, "Hey, I found this thing," and it completely changes everything, well, what happens? you lose your credibility. If you lose your credibility, then people are going to be looking like, why, why should we listen to you? So now your entire career is in jeopardy. Now, science is supposed to say, hey, we go where the evidence leads. We have better evidence. Great. Let's rework this and come out the other side. But history kind of shows that's not what happens, right? You show up and you've got to, let's look at Einstein's 1905 papers, right? Where he comes up with the theory of relativity, as well as some other papers. When we tell the story, it's sort of like he writes the papers, boom, he becomes this great famous physicist and everyone loves him, right? That is not what happened. He wrote his papers and then everyone went, that's fine. We're going to go back to doing our normal things. It wasn't until really the late 20s, early 30s before someone said, hey, we can prove this is real. That's when he blew up. Like, it took a while because his theories were so radically different from what was established, what was understood, and what was accepted. Again, I'm going to phrase this next sentence very carefully because I don't want to get in the weeds. But science is not supposed to be about consensus. It's about evidence. But unfortunately, people got to eat. So oftentimes what we find is that a theory that has popularity amongst the government or those in power or those who are handing out cash, those are the theories that get pursued, and those are the preconceived notions, right? Oftentimes the sort of the foundational ideas are just as important as what is they're actually studying. Again, I've used this metaphor before or analogy before, but I think it works. If we were to find some, these stones out there with markings on them and they're arranged in a triangle, but we said, okay, we want to figure out where these came from, how these get here, but we can't assume humans did it. Well, that throws everything that we would do into question, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Because if we have something that's clearly artificial, it's like maybe we shouldn't assume it's artificial. I agree with that. But we do need to at least ask the question if it's artificial and say, well, does an artificial, a theory of artificiality best explain what we're seeing? But if we just chuck that off to the side, then we could create whole branches of science and of geography or geology and of water, all these things to explain something that's not that, because we're not accepting one actual possibility. And I think in the sciences, again, I'm going to be real because I don't want to get us off track. For a show that's called Anything Goes, and let's keep it on track here.
Let's go for it.
Well, okay, so there are sciences that are hard sciences where it's like gravity, right? Like, yep, gravity's still there, right? You can do a test. But when you start talking about things like questions of origins, some of these genuinely advanced theoretical physicists or physics, and even some of these other things, quote unquote climate change, you start seeing that there's people saying, hey, we have this, and they're like, nope, we can't talk about it, and they just shove that off to the side. So it's like thinking back to the Cinephali, it's like I'm the first one to say I don't know that there were actual people with dog heads running around making textiles and barking at each other. But I can't say that it didn't occur because there's too many people saying that it did. Could there be other explanations? Yeah. But also I look at the historians who say that never happened. It's all mythology. Just people were drunk and they wrote it down because they thought someone would buy it. I don't know that answer works either for me, right? Like, and if that's what we're going to do, we're just going to shove all this off to the side and ignore all of it. Then I got to question the rest of what you're doing, right? And that's sort of the problem, is that we have a lot of, to your point, a lot of museums, a lot of academia that is working from certain preconceived notions, and when anything weird really shows up, right, it tends to get shoved away because they're like, well, it doesn't fit our model, and we have too much money invested in this worldview.
Yeah. What was I going to go back and say? Some people made a couple of good comments to what you're saying. Can't find them now. Sorry.
That's okay. You can make questions up too. I'm all good.
I'm trying. Also, grants or funding scientists turned into businessmen, so they won't do anything that will mess up their funding and careers.
Yeah,
that's a good point. And also, science is only what they know up to now. Whatever they do know, it's not the actual answers, is it? And nothing is really is only explained to the point that people can explain things. And I guess the like you say, the more ones that are going to suit the narrative better are going to be the ones that are going to be put out there.
Well, it's not just what we can. It's not just our best. It's best guess. It's real science is best guess.
Yeah.
But it's also our ability to measure something or observe something, right? I mean that's really the thing that we kind of forget is what can we actually see? What can we actually observe? As we learn more, we can start throwing things into it. But it's like, okay, I mean, this is our best guess. How do we have people running around and they're using almost they use language where they're speaking almost ex cathedra on something, and I'm like, you can't possibly know that. You're working. I'm sorry, but you're talking out of your butt. You're not. I'm avoiding the swear jar this time.
Is that a swear word? Is that a swear word?
No, it's not. But that's what I'm saying. I avoided the swear word that I wanted to use.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'll let you off this time. But it's $10 a pop.
That's why I'm too rich for my blood. I'll just be over here.
I don't think I need to tell you really.
Gosh darning it! Yeah, I'll be gosh darning it and Jiminy cricking it over here.
Good.
Because we all know how much of a potty mouth you are.
Oh, I know. Get me offline and all those terrible.
Man,
you won't recognize, would you?
Sailors, they're just run screaming.
I'm terrible. And let's just talking about those creatures out there. Someone did make a good point, and I'm sorry if I can't. I think Tim Tarabocha. Don't forget, some things exist in their own frequency, like little people, fairies, right? Maybe. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely possible. I think there's two truths that we need to really sort of keep our mind open. Which is, again, I don't want to derail us too much, but there's been a huge climactic shift over the last 2,000 years. Really, it happened about 1,300 years ago with the Maunders Minimum. That killed off, I think, a lot of things. People just absolutely don't realize how dramatic of a shift there was 1,000 years ago, and really that we're coming out of just a little tiny ice age. So I think there's a lot of physical creatures who have absolutely died. They're just gone. And again, because there was nothing to fossilize them, we'll never have any real evidence of them, right? All we have are the stories people have, because that's basically the only history that we have. The other aspect of this is I do believe that there are creatures that are physical, or at least can take physical form, that are supernatural. I don't believe that the line between material and supernatural is as hard and fast as people want them to be, right? I think there's some people who look at supernatural creatures and say, oh, well, they are all, spiritual, or, we could almost equate them to being psychic events more than anything else, right? Just entirely immaterial. And while that is true for some, it's also perfectly true that there are creatures that have physical effect on the universe that are absolutely physical, but they're also supernatural. A great example, in fact, I got a story, some friends of mine over at a different channel were I just interviewed them for something else I was doing. They had a story that's not too far from the White Rock Lake goat man, right? But this one actually happened inside somebody's house. The power had gone out. They turned on. They had lit a bunch of candles, right? 'Cause it's the middle of the night. And they're all hanging out in this room, and then all of a sudden they hear something sort of scurrying around or moving in the bathroom, and all they can see is the light from the candles, right? Because it's around this door and a little bit further down the hallway. And the mother brings the kids close together, and she starts yelling, "It's like, hey, who's there? Who's going there? I got a gun." All of a sudden they hear, and the lights go out in the hallway.
Wow.
Because the candles were blown out, and they could smell it. And now they're as far in, because now they're thinking that someone has broken in, and they have clearly ill intent, right? So they're in this room, and they're as far back as she is. Again, she's got her kids held around, and they're looking up, and all of a sudden, this head pokes itself out from behind the door. And they said it was smiling. They said it was only a couple of feet off the ground, but it was a head. And they said it looked like a leprechaun's head or an elf head at first, but it was smiling, right? And then it got further into the room and then stood up. And it was 7 feet tall, very thin,
Wow.
very lanky. It takes 2 more steps towards them. They're freaking out. Disappears in a blinding flash of light. Okay, what in the world do you do with that? It blew out a candle. So this wasn't some sort of mass hallucination or a purely spiritual creature. It blew out their candles. But that looks very similar to the story of Sandy Grace that we got from the late 90s, early 2000s in around White Rock Lake. Broad daylight. She's running around. Nick Redfern actually took this. I think someone else got it first, then he got it. But she's running around White Rock Lake, which is what a lot of people do, right? It's a beautiful place. Lots of people go there to run. And she feels this sense of panic just wash over her. She's having a full-blown panic attack. And then, as she stops, she's like, what the heck is going on? This creature steps out from behind the tree line. And she describes it as 7 foot tall, basically full-blown satyr. Horns, the hairy legs, hooves, whole 9 yards. Smiling like the Joker. It starts walking towards her. And she's paralyzed from fear. He gets 15 feet away from her, crouches down, disappears in a flash of light. Wow. What do you do with that? It's like there are clearly creatures that have physical effect on the universe, or at least our material universe. But they clearly ain't from around here, right? That's not a natural thing. So, yeah, I mean, at this point, we got to consider that maybe some of these things do exist, but they exist in a very different way. Maybe they only become visible or tangible because they need to eat, right? Like again, let's go back to the story that from Missing in Alaska with these apes.
That kind of doesn't make sense to me, though. Why do these things need to eat if they can?
I don't know. Again, that was just a thing. That was just.
Yeah.
I'm not even theorizing they do need to eat, but maybe they. I don't know. Maybe that's the thing is.
How do these things sustain themselves? That's another interesting thing. Do they just live off energy? And is it just that they can only perform if they've got enough energy around them?
Mm-hmm. Maybe they feed off of fear. Right?
That's just a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, what if they... Because, okay, straight up, we know that certain straight up demonic entities feed off of fear. They are attracted to it. They feed off of it. They grow off of it. Maybe maybe it's not just purely demonic creatures that do. Maybe there's a lot of creatures like that. Maybe some that are maybe they are demonic, but they have some, again, like the Nephilim, where they have some sort of physical component to them. They're able to draw off of that power.
They must have like an energy panel, like a solar panel. in a sense, because you think that they would need energy to create enough physicality, however, to scare someone. So then what? They take the fear and store it, or what? You know, it's but fear. I always think fear and you know, vulnerable people, not necessarily people who are old or disabled. I don't like that, and with no disrespect, but people who maybe are just vulnerable in the mind space where they're at, are easy to chip into.
No, I think you're onto something. I think that may be legitimate. You know what surprised me? This goes back into what we were talking about. I can't remember what episode. We were talking about the Out of Shadows documentary, right? One of the things that they talked about was, again, I will sit here and publicly say I don't know about adrenochrome. That whole thing, I don't know. Do I believe? And in fact, let me take it one step further. Do I know for a fact that there are people who are committing these heinous crimes? That there is if it isn't actually a governmental agency, it's a near governmental agency that's handling a lot of this stuff. Absolutely, I've met their victims. I've seen it. Yes, it is real. Are they sacrificing children and draining this adrenochrome? Okay, I don't know that I can go that far, but I'm also not going to say it's not real, right? But this idea of the thing I find very, very that rings very true from what I've seen in both the survivors I've dealt with and people who have had other demonic encounters in their lives, is this idea of creating a very lasting trauma of fear that creates hatred, and how much power that gives them over an individual's life and maybe in the world itself. And I can't help but look at the world around us, right? Allow me to get somewhat political for just 2 seconds. I can't help but notice all of the fear, all of the hatred that our politicians deliberately create to obtain power. I can't help but wonder how much of that is designed to deliberately feed something else. Like maybe they just see it as the easiest way to get power. Okay, fine, I can buy that. But what if it's bigger than that? What if they know exactly what they're doing, and they know that if they feed this energy out into the universe, that other creatures gain more power, and maybe they know that's what they're doing. At least some of them, clearly not everyone, but maybe a lot more of them know what they're doing than we think, right? Maybe they don't. Maybe some of them do buy into that, and so I don't know, right? And maybe the question isn't as sorry. I spoke. You go, please.
Well, I was just going to say, there's that stuff going on everywhere. There's an underground cult of high profile people that seem to be associated to these satanic rituals that where I'm sorry, I'm going to go quite deep here, so I'll apologize to people. But there are reports, where young babies are being sacrificed, and it's for some reason it's fueling. It's part of whatever these rituals are, whatever they believe in, whatever they think that they need to, sacrifice these babies. There's just too many reports out there about this now. And more recently, I sent you that link to the Maria Farmer interview that's out there. Go on to Sean Atwood's YouTube. I'll put a link up to that because this is stuff that is going on, real stuff, horrendous stuff that's going on, and it needs to be brought up, to be brought, raise awareness to this, and people are now really trying. I would actually like to get a guy on here to come and talk about it one night, because it's a real eye-opener to what is going on. and
Yes.
we need to wake up for it and wake up to it. And it's people that are in our mainstream media
Mm-hmm.
that are involved in our
Oh yeah.
government, that are involved in this.
Oh,
And
and yeah, absolutely. And they're held on, and they're helping cover it up. And I think, okay, maybe the majority of them don't understand what they're doing. They're following orders, right? But some of them absolutely do.
yeah,
I mean, that's just the way it is.
and this thing's been going on for years and years and years, and so it's been passed down and carried on. And
Mm-hmm.
then I kind of wonder, there's been so many people exposed recently and over the last few years, and a lot of these people are dying off. The old school names that are coming up, and whether these new people who are involved in this, how are they involved in it? Why are they involved in it? Uh, is this, you know, is it so embedded in what reality is, and we just don't know about it? We're not even part of what the reality of this world is, because we're just, we're out there to earn money, to keep the world going round with the pennies, where there's,
Mm-hmm.
like, say, maybe something much deeper going on that we're just completely oblivious to.
Yeah.
Um, it's sick. It really is sick if people look into this. This is, something different. And
Mm-hmm. Well, so here's the thing, right? All right. Yeah, it's anything goes. So, two thoughts. I want to take one step back to you because how much power do they need? I look throughout uh, scripture, right? And it becomes clear that maybe it's not the power that we think of, like to generate something, right? Like putting gas in an engine to run it. Maybe it's more about authority, right? Maybe it's more about permission. And what I mean by that is some of these supernatural creatures clearly have far more power than we ever could, but but the thing is, there is that protective barrier between our world and theirs. But what they need is us to allow them over. I think that this may, again, when we talk about it, they feed off of it, it empowers them. I think it's more about empowering them to work in our side of the veil, right? Um, there, something that sort of really opened my eyes is there's a in Leviticus it talks about how if they were to come across a dead body, right? Let's say someone has been murdered out in the middle of nowhere, whoever found the body was legally obligated to go to the nearest city, and that city, those elders were to come out. There was a specific ritual they were supposed to perform. They were supposed to make sure the body was cared for and interred, but they had to pray on behalf of the entire city to say that this man's blood was on their hands. That basically was to cleanse the whole site because they didn't know, was he murdered? Was this a natural? Was this something else? Right? Because they flat out said, right, wherever there's innocent blood shed, God's disfavor falls. Well, wherever that disfavor is, that's where some of these creatures have absolute power, right? So I think it's not that they're feeding because they like us, like we need to eat to live. I think this is more about them getting access to our world. So maybe it's not as much power as we think. Maybe it's more about authority and removing the protections between our world and theirs. But then to return to your last statement, how maybe this is something we don't know. I see that whole battle from the beginning in this book for me, right? It's like you want to talk about child sacrifices all throughout this book, and it's actually one of the primary reasons God talks about, hey, you've got to destroy this nation in here. They actually flat out talk about this child sacrifice stuff. It's got to stop. You have to end it, and you have to get rid of it. Don't even have anything to do with these things. And every time it happens, God's like, fine, if y'all are going to participate, here's some other nation to come out and kick your butts from here to Timbuktu, and you're going to be out of your nation for 70 years. Then I'll bring you back. Why? Because he finds that abhorrent because of what it can do. Right? It's destroying his own creation, which is the first problem that he has, because he loves all of us, and he's like, "Why are you killing each other? I hate it when my kids are arguing over who gets the last Coke or something, right?" It's like I hear them fighting. I'm like, really? I get overly frustrated. And I start yelling at them, and I'm like, how much must God look at us when we're like, "Yep, let's go take a whole bunch of babies alive and roll them into a fire to some pagan god"? How much is he like, what? Okay. It's like, it's got to spin him into a whole new dimension of pissed off. That doesn't count.
That does count. I'm
No.
putting. Sorry, Jay.
All right, fine. $10.
Pagans? Is it pagans that are involved in this?
Oh, it's everyone.
Okay.
It's everyone. That's the whole point, right? It's like, it's everyone. That's the point. Is that that it's all throughout, but it's this fight, right? And I love the fact that it's even like, well, who's, what counts as a pagan per se? It's like, even in this, because we see the ancient Israelites participating in the same thing, which is usually when he's like, all right, I'm going to take these people that you don't like, and I'm going to give them power to destroy you and drive you away, and then I'll bring you back once you've learned your lesson. Because the simple fact of the matter is, there is a fight. There is a war between, and I think this is where, to quote from the great movie The Usual Suspects, the greatest trick Satan ever performed was making people believe he didn't exist. He's right there, and he's out in public, and we don't see him because we don't want to see him. We don't want to see how evil our leaders and our culture can get. And it's just so much easier to just enjoy the candy coated reality that we get to live in, and just be like, well, we don't see that. There's none so blind as those who refuse to see.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? And the world has always been like this. I think we've always been like this, haven't we? We've just
we just find more technologically advanced ways to do it, is all it is.
Yeah. Well, look, has anyone got any questions? Anyone want to add to anything that we've been talking about? Osquatch Australia mentioned before, let's go back to the beginning and talking about heads, and she mentioned gargoyles, which are put all over the place, aren't they? I did take some photographs last weekend, and that's one on the side of the Priory Church I went to. What are they about? Do you know?
Well, okay, as an artist, I actually have a love of gargoyles. That's a good question, right? So there's a couple things happening here. We can go really far back on this, and that's the thing, is what we consider to be gargoyles are just a continuation of very old practices of creating these scary creatures, right, in stone, and using them to sort of ward off evil spirits. That was always the idea, and that goes back to Pazuzu, right? I don't know if I said that correctly. The Sumerians had it, right? It was some sort of little deity. So it goes all the way back. However, that's how long the day's been. I've spoken with psychics and other people who've claimed that things like gargoyles exist in a again, for them it was mostly supernatural, but that they would drain, like they would say that they would attach themselves to people and drain them, right? Like they were, again, usually it was something like hatred or anger that attached them to you, usually some sort of trauma, but they would just latch onto somebody and just sort of drain their life force, which is why they felt drained all the time. But the way they described them was, they were supernatural and invisible, but that they were also somehow tangible. So I don't know. A lot, again, the tradition goes back so far. It's just sort of the more modern version of it. But I can't help but wonder if there's some legitimacy to it, right?
Well, what's interesting is when I was looking at old folklore before, that there's many stories. I don't know who you use, but we use like someone called Wee Willie Winky, or like
Yeah.
the equivalent of the bogeyman, to make sure your kids go to bed. Otherwise,
Yes.
he'll come and he'll take you, drag you down the river or whatever. Why were we scaring the life out of children when all we wanted them to do was just go to bed and have a nice sleep? Why would children sleep well, knowing that there's this thing going to tap on the window? I don't get the kind of logic of it. Fear control.
I think so. Okay, first of all, I have heard of Wee Willie Winky as well. We don't have him here. We have we've got a lot actually. But yeah, like you said, the boogeyman, things like that. I I can't help but wonder if maybe a lot of these things sort of started off legitimate, right? Like there was this sort of legitimate fear of things that would come out and get them at night, so they would create rituals and whatever to protect you. I mean, to protect children. Even the lullaby literally comes out of the word Lilith, right? Which was a female demon that would come and eat babies. So I think a lot of it sort of starts there, but then at some point it devolves into something. It's almost fun to scare the kids, or maybe you just want them to behave. It's like, because reasoning with children does, let me assure you, does not work on any level. Scaring the crap out of them absolutely works. So I think at some point it maybe just devolves to the basic level of just, I'd rather scare them so at least they'd stay in bed. I think that may be a large part of it, but I think on some level, instinctively, we always know that there is something actually there. Like even the adults, it's like maybe you actually do believe it. You don't realize that you believe it, but you do. And it's almost a subconscious way of trying to protect them a little bit, even though you're in your mind, you're like, I just want them to shut up and go to bed.
We'd be conditioned as well as kids.
Yeah.
And once that stuff's put in your mind at that age, you're carrying it with you, whether you believe it or not, aren't you?
Mm-hmm.
And, everybody wants to really believe that Santa does exist. Well, maybe not everyone. But, well, it's been interesting.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot tonight and been quite diverse with where the sin of Apocalypse.
What the what again? The what?
Can't wait for next week. Next week I might find something that's hard to pronounce. For you.
I found a creature named Bob. Bob the creature.
I'm sure there'll be something that we'll come up with. We might even have a guest next Sunday, so we can talk to them about anything goes. But guys, thanks for joining us. We're coming up to the hour. I've said the other night, I don't know if you're watching last night, but I'm going to move my walks and stuff like that to another channel. So anybody who wants to follow me there, I'll put up a link soon, and I'll probably talk to you before then. Before I do that, so guys, go and check out Jason's channel again. Not Another Bible Study. The link is in the description. Go and check out the Shudder. Go and check out Rooted Expeditions, and go and check out if you want. Oh, I've got to find it now because I can't remember. I'm so organized. He comes in the chat, Urban Grassman 614, and I just had a look at his channel. He's got some nice little videos up, and he's looking for Ohio Grassman, I believe. So
yes,
he's got some nice little videos on there. So go and check him out because I enjoyed looking at his videos. All right, guys. Thanks everyone in the chat. Thanks for joining in. And I'll see you all soon. Thank you, Jason. It's been
Appreciate
a
you,
pleasure
Danielle.
as always. Okay, good night, everyone.
Bye.